Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. Cross and Crown channel is about presenting powerful proof for the Christian faith. If you want to support Mike as he makes videos and writes books, just go to Mike's Patreon page at patreon.com/mrob and kick in $1 or so. If you join us over there, that would be awesome. Supporting this work will help bring countless people to Christ. If you like this video, there's a donation button on our main YouTube page. Thanks for hanging out.
Good evening. This is Cross and Crown Radio and the Gospel Truth Podcast. And I'm Mike Robinson, your host. We got a great show tonight on Cross and Crown Radio. We're going to be talking about can life come from non-life? In other words, is there such a thing as abiogenesis, which evolution needs? Unguided Darwinian evolution needs that to start, but can you even get out of the starting blocks? It would seem impossible. So we're going to go over that tonight. We're also going to be talking about a nutritional program called time-restricted eating, which is a type of fasting, and it seems to have a lot of scientific backing that it might be really healthy, especially those who have diabetes or those who are trying to gain muscle, as well as other things, heart disease, cancer. Then we're going to talk about the need for Christ-centered preaching. And if you look at the description here on Facebook, you can see our Patreon page. All those who like the show, if you could help us out by going over the Patreon page and kicking in $1, maybe $5, even more if you want, that really helps us a lot. So you can go there to our Patreon page. And also we have this show that we put it on YouTube, on Cross and Crown Radio on YouTube. You can subscribe there. There's also a place for a donation. But it seems clear that life can only come from life. And yet evolutionists, especially those who believe in unguided evolution, Darwinian evolution, they think this must happen. And yet scientifically it's been disproved that life can come from non-life. For the Darwinian, you have to ask them, where did life come from if not from God? And then they would have to say spontaneous generation, which of course was disproved by Pasteur, which we're going to get into in a little bit. But this is required to have unguided evolution, to have Darwinian evolution. So they have a big problem from the get-go. Can life come from non-life? No, 1,000 times no. It's a crazy idea. It's almost as crazy as atheist Lawrence Krauss's idea, which a lot of atheists have now backed, that nothing can create everything. So you can see how irrational atheism can be. It's not just that atheism cannot give you the foundation for the laws of logic and reason and the extension and application thereof, which is true, and that's devastating, but it also ends up being very irrational in what it proposes. Atheism is a bad idea. It's a real bad idea, and a really bad idea is also life coming from non-life. It's generally believed that life cannot come from non-life, except for in the ancient peoples, especially the Greeks and the Romans, they thought it could be. And until the Middle Ages, a lot of scholars thought it could happen. And then, of course, Pasteur disproved it. But the ancient Greeks believed that frogs and insects and such could come from just some goos. And without understanding the complexity of DNA, without understanding the life of a cell, without understanding biochemistry, you could kind of see where they might come from. They look at some raw meat and it goes rotten, and all of a sudden there's some eggs there, and then the eggs turn into flies, and so you can see, well, yeah, see, it just happened. They don't know what was happening before that because they did not have it contained. And so it's important that we understand that evolution, Darwinian evolution, is not possible. It's not possible. It doesn't. If it was true, it doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. You'd have to try to assert non-directed evolution to make that point, but you can't with just Darwinian evolution. But the point is, Darwinian evolution cannot be true. It's not possible. Louis Pasteur proved that spontaneous generation of life did not happen. The agnostic Huxley said this: "If it were given to me to look beyond the abyss of geological recorded time to the still more remote period when the earth was passing through physical and chemical conditions, which it can no more see again than a man can recall his infancy, I should expect to be a witness of evolution of living protoplasm from non-living matter." See, you can see how faith-based it is. It's not just faith-based, but it's blind faith. They base it on blind faith. Genesis clearly says that God created all living things, that living things require God. And of course, that makes sense. That made sense even before scientists discovered DNA and all the information content within DNA. That just makes it even more devastating. But today, many scientists proclaim that life arose from non-life, in the past from this primordial soup. Of course, with their intelligence, with trying to figure out all the chemicals that are needed, the minerals, the amino acids, and putting all those all together and then throwing some lightning bolts or electricity in there, they still cannot create life, even as they are themselves trying to design it. So even with intelligent design of human beings, at this point, they have not been able to create life. Now, if somehow they could at some point, using all the materials God has already supplied on the earth, and they use their intelligence to create life, that's just demonstrating that life demands intelligence to create it. And now give us the building blocks. You have to have God, of course. But they're so far away from that. It looks impossible that they can even do that in the lab with intelligence, with designing it themselves. Currently, though, many scientists reject spontaneous generation, except in the case that started all life. It's amazing. So they accept Pasteur's proof, except with the start of life, the most important thing they be in. So it's amazing. Pasteur, of course, proved it by sealing flasks and such, and demonstrating that it would take microorganisms to bring forth life and so forth, things that people couldn't see before that. And so he discovered that the fermentation process was not spontaneous generation. It wasn't life coming from non-life, but it was something that if you sealed off, the other products or the other bacteria that would make the fermentation could not get in, and so you would not have life. So Pasteur utilized the microscope to observe the microorganisms that produce the fermentation, and he demonstrated that they're airborne. Once that was proved, spontaneous generation was done, until, of course, Charles Darwin came along and said, oh no, we need spontaneous generation to start this whole process of evolution. So we got to take that by blind faith. And you know what? It's even worse than blind faith. It's faith that goes against all the evidence. It's, as Dawkins would say, in the teeth of evidence. And so they're saying spontaneous generation never ever occurs except the one time. It cannot be observed. They cannot get spontaneous generation to occur anywhere in the world over all these hundreds of years. But you know what? It did happen the first time. That takes blind faith. But we know the law of biogenesis, that all living cells come from other living cells, is an established law. We must base our science on that, or anytime life can just pop up here or pop up there and ruin all of our scientific experiments. But they already presuppose that. They already assume the law of biogenesis, that life begets life, as the Bible says. The building blocks of protein come from left-handed or right-handed forms. Living things can only use left-handed ones. If a protein is being assembled by a cell were to even use one right-handed building block, it would destroy the function of the end product. So it couldn't happen. So you got this chicken and egg problem all through the process of trying to get that first cell. It goes over and over again. And they're saying, okay, I have blind faith that somehow that's just going to come together by chance. DNA and RNA also use pure right-handed. If men designed a way in which the right materials could create life, again, it would not prove that spontaneous generation could occur, because they're just using their intelligence to manipulate and design what God has already provided and copied what God did to produce life. But even at this point, they're still a far way off from doing that, if they can ever do it. So DNA cannot do its work, including forming more DNA, which you need for the life to go on, right? Without the help of enzymes. Enzymes are a type of protein. Amino acids chain together for a particular function. In short, proteins cannot come without DNA, but DNA cannot come without these proteins. So you need the proteins to get the DNA, you need DNA to get the proteins for the DNA. So it's that chicken and egg problem again, and you see this over and over with this idea of abiogenesis. In other words, the rejection of biogenesis. So it's another way of saying spontaneous generation. So we're taught as in kids in public schools that evolution is true. Look at monkeys, look at apes. There are their brothers and sisters. There are distant relatives. And so even beyond that is other mammals, and beyond that are frogs, and then fishes, and then bacteria and so forth. And they say all this started. And there's questions that arise when you think about that. If you think, okay, human beings, they say, is at the apex. Human beings are at the apex of the evolutionary process. But why is that the case? I mean, why would something want to or have to or would evolve from a cockroach? Cockroaches are very, very resilient organisms, very, very stout. Why would they ever need to evolve into something else? Scientists say that they could survive a nuclear war. So the cockroach is a tremendous proof against the evolutionary process. In other words, as you go up the evolutionary chain, you see larger and larger mammals, and all those large mammals, almost all of them are on the endangered species list. So all these things that supposedly evolved, it makes no sense. If there's a mechanism linked to something like survival of the fittest, these animals that are mammals, these large body mass mammals, do not survive that well. They're almost all wiped off the planet. If humans didn't protect them, they would be gone, gone, gone. Whales, right? Tigers, lions, all these things are endangered. And apes, most of the ape family, monkeys, can be endangered because they're mammals. But cockroaches, even with raid, are not an endangered species. Even going beyond that, past that, and back to the original bacteria, bacteria is also very, very stout. You get antibiotics and you create them, and then all of a sudden the bacteria, because of within the information within the cell of the bacteria, they can survive, and they keep surviving and surviving and surviving. It's hard to kill and wipe out bacteria. Why would these simple cells even evolve? Why would they evolve? It makes no sense for those simple cells to eventually become a tiger, and a tiger is very easy to wipe out, or to become a whale, which is easy to wipe out, or a great ape, which is easy to wipe out. It makes no sense whatsoever. But abiogenesis is a theory that living things can be produced only by other living things. So you cannot get life from non-life. If you want to see more on that, you can get my book, Fake Atheism. It's on Amazon, as well as my book, God Does Exist, on Amazon by Mike Robinson. So the earth is filled right now with lots of non-matter. Lots of non-life, right? That's made of just matter, rocks and dirt and such. Nobody's ever observed any of that becoming living. You just don't observe it. With controlled mechanisms in place, you don't see non-life producing life. You don't see it anywhere. Even though there's billions of humans walking around the earth, there's been millions and millions of humans walking the earth and observing these things for centuries, and no one's ever seen life pop into existence from non-life. It doesn't happen, even though earth is filled with non-living matter. So we also see earth with a lot of living matter, and none of this living matter can ever be traced back to non-living matter. It's always, always, always traced back to living matter. Oh, hello, Christina. How's you guys doing? How's Jim? It's good to see you guys tonight. Hope the weather in California is doing well. We're out here in Granbury, Texas, and all things are going really well here. So good to see you guys, Jill, everybody. But life coming from non-life, it makes no sense. I mean, logically, it makes no sense. Just with common sense, it makes no sense. There's no evidence there. There's no proof there. All the evidence and proof goes against it. All common sense and all logic goes against it. Yet atheists want us to take it by blind faith, that life arose from non-life. Robert Jastrow, atheist, said, either life was created on earth by the will of a being outside the grasp of scientific understanding, or it evolved on the planet spontaneously through chemical reactions occurring in non-living matter lying on the surface of the planet. I'd rather go with Genesis 2:7 that says, and the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed life into his nostrils. That's what the Bible says. And Encyclopedia Britannica says that this so-called spontaneous generation, or abiogenesis, is a process by which living organisms are thought to develop from non-living matter, and the basis of a theory on the origin of life on earth. Of course, there's no proof, no evidence for it. They take it by blind faith that one day lightning just hit the pool of proteins in just the right way, and it created life. Now, if that occurred, why would it also reproduce? So it's not just that you have to create the life, which is impossible, which we've already showed, but that life that you create also has to reproduce itself. So what's ever created has to also have the ability to recreate itself and to go on and on and on. So it has to, it just takes too much blind faith for me to handle this life coming from non-life. Before I was a Christian, it troubled me because I just didn't know. I mean, it makes no sense that you see everything living on the planet and everything that's ever been seen living came from other living entities. How could life come from non-life? It makes no sense. And of course, when I was in school, I learned that Pasteur proved that spontaneous generation did not occur. It did not occur. So this is, if you talk to somebody who really, really believes in evolution, unguided Darwinian evolution, I would encourage you to really, really press them to give you an answer. And don't let off. They'll change the subject, or maybe they'll give you a little weak answer, then change the subject. They'll want to get off this really fast. Just keep pressing it. Just keep pressing it over and over for them to think about this. How could life come from non-life? Let them try to give you an answer, and then pick it apart and press it again and press it again. This is one of the most powerful ways. They can't even get out of the starting gate with this. So the research has proved that spontaneous generation does not occur. Abiogenesis is impossible. Here's what George Wald of Harvard said. He's not a Christian. He's not a theist. As for spontaneous generation, it continued to find acceptance until it was finally disposed of by the work of Pasteur. Then he added, one has only to contemplate the magnitude of the task to concede that spontaneous generation of a living organism is impossible. Yet, here we are as a result, I believe, of spontaneous generation. So he says, spontaneous generation is impossible, but I choose to believe it anyways. So anytime they try to say, well, you Christians are kind of silly with believing in the Bible. Well, the Bible has massive evidence and proof for it. Not only that, the biblical text revealing the God that we need for the foundation for reason and rationality to look at anything, to use our analytical skills to examine anything. God must exist as the ground for that rationality, for that reason. So it's false on so many levels. It's just silly. It's flat out silly. Another atheist said this, John Keeson, a biology professor at Rutgers. He said, even conceptually, it's difficult to see how a system satisfying the minimum criteria for a living thing can arise by chance. So he makes that point. It's impossible to see it. Now, Hoyle said this, precious little in the way of biochemical evolution could have happened on Earth. It's easy to show that the 2,000 or so enzymes that span the whole of life could not have evolved on Earth. If one counts a number of trial assemblies of amino acids that are needed to give rise to the enzymes, the probability of their discovery by random shufflings turns out to be less than 1 to 40,000 chance. That's impossible. Yet, the atheists want you and I to take it by blind faith as they try to attack our faith, as they try to attack God, as they try to attack the only foundation and font for reason, the only foundation and font to give an account for the tools we utilize in science. In other words, without God, you cannot have science. And yet they attack that, and believe these crazy fables and fairy tales. It's really, really sad. Hello, Samuel. So good to have you. Hello, Jody. So good to see you, Melissa. So Joe Horgan of Scientific America, he said this, the facts turned the origin of life into the classic chicken or egg puzzle. Which came first, proteins or the DNA? That's quite a problem. How likely is it that DNA and its necessary proteins happen to evolve at exactly the same time in the same place and then survived? The chance it's impossible. Okay, the Dictionary of Scientific and Technical Terms defines abiogenesis as the obsolete concept that plant and animal life arise from non-living organic matter. You can see that. These folks, I really feel sorry for them. They get sucked in and pulled into these odd ideas, these ideas that make no sense. Like I said earlier, the idea that a lot of the newer atheists are trying to promulgate is that everything, the whole cosmos came from nothing, that nothing created everything, which of course is a logical impossibility. Their only chance is to hope that the universe has been here forever, or multiple universes have been here forever. And of course, all the science says, no, that didn't happen. There's no a shred of evidence for any of that. All the evidence points to a beginning of the solar system and the cosmos. So it's really, really sad that these poor folks get caught up into that. Klaus Dowse pointed out more than 30 years of experimentation on the origin of life in the fields of chemical and molecular evolution have led to a better perception of the immensity of the problem or the origin of life on Earth rather than to its solution. So the more and more they get engaged in laboratory to try to produce life in a lab with all the knowledge they have, with all the proteins already assembled there for them to utilize, they still can't do it. He goes on to say, at the present, all discussions on principal theories and experiments in the field either end in stalemate. They end in stalemate. Evolutionist John Maddox said in Nature, it is disappointing that the origin of the genetic code is still as obscure as the origin of life itself. Richard Hazen. Now, all these guys are atheist evolutionists. And notice what they concede, right? The origin of life is subject of immense complexity, and I have to tell you right up front, we don't know how life began. They don't, because it could not have began from non-life. There has to be a creator, and they know this. The Bible says that they know that God exists, but they suppress that truth in unrighteousness. How can I tell about the origin of life when we are so woefully ignorant of the history, is how Hazen concludes. If life is just a result of improbable succession of chemical steps, then any scientific attempt to understand life's origin is doomed to failure, he adds. I must tell you, that's a depressing thought to someone like me who has devoted a decade to understanding the origin of life. Wow. So this is what he's really, really focused on, and he cannot come up with anything, nothing, just blank. He can't. Why? Because he doesn't look to Genesis. He doesn't look to God. There's your answer. Now take that answer as a ground and foundation for life and knowledge and reason, and then extend that into your science instead of trying to ignore it or trying to reject it or trying to deny it. Paul Davies, another non-Christian, says this. One of the great outstanding scientific mysteries is the origin of life. How did it happen? The truth is, nobody has a clue. Wow. Nobody has a clue. Oh my. Dawkins said this on the origin of life. Here's one of the nastiest new atheists there are. This guy is just mean-spirited and bigoted. He says, nobody knows how it got started. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life. It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule. Then the interviewer asked him, right, and how did that happen? And Dawkins replied, I've told you, we don't know. And then the interviewer said, so you have no idea how it started? Dawkins replied, no, nor has anybody. So even this just brutal atheist, this guy that's always on the attack, who hates God. Why does he hate God? Because he knows God exists and God is holy and righteous, and Dawkins isn't. He should go to Christ as Savior and Lord and then get all the shame and guilt he has that makes him so mean-spirited off of his back. But he doesn't do it. Another atheist admitted this. He said, as far as life coming from non-life, at this point it's necessary to reveal a little inside information about how scientists work. Something the textbooks don't usually tell you. The fact is, scientists are not really as objective and dispassionate in their work as they would like you to think. Most scientists first get their ideas about how the world works through logical processes, not hunches, but wild guesses. He says it's motivated by faith in their own ideas. So you can see that blind faith that they believe in, that has no proof, has no evidence, cannot provide the ground and the foundation and the source for these universal mutables that are utilized in the scientific pursuit. And it's the scientific method. They cannot give you the tools, the foundation for those tools. They use the tools. They borrow God's capital, if you will. They do that. So they borrow all God's tools, all God's resources, all the while trying to reject him for Darwinian evolution. Anthony Flew, probably the most famous atheist in the 70s and 80s and early 90s. He was kind of a new atheist before there was new atheist. After decades of promoting atheism, he decided near the end of his life that there has to be a supreme being. He said this, The only satisfactory explanation of the origin of such end-directed, self-replicating life as we see on Earth is an infinitely intelligent mind. Wow. So spontaneous generation does not occur. It cannot occur. It has not occurred. God is necessary, and everybody knows that. Everybody knows that God exists, and yet the atheists deny that. Why? Because they're suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. That's why they hate moral absolutes. If you want more on moral absolutes, you can get my book. There are moral absolutes on Amazon also. Now, we're going to change gears a little bit and get a little bit of nutrition. And there's some really interesting fads, if you will. But what's interesting about some of the modern fads, like the keto diet and the one I'm going to be talking about today, time-restricted eating, there seems to be some really powerful science behind it. In the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, early 2000s, most diets did not have that much science behind it. What would happen is someone would utilize some type of nutritional system or diet that might make some sense to them. They might have a hunch about it, and it would work for them, and they would promote it in a book. Maybe there'd be some obscure science would back it up. But nowadays, there is a lot of scientific information, especially for time-restricted eating. This is a really important type of diet or nutritional program, is probably a better way of putting it, because it's not necessary for people who want to lose weight. It reduces the hours that you eat each day, and this has been shown to increase muscle mass and reduce fat stores. So it won't necessarily lose weight because muscle weighs more than fat. And so muscle's heavier, but you will lose fat. And one of the main reasons for that, it jumps up your HCG, your human growth hormone. As people get older, your human growth hormone levels go lower and lower and lower. Okay? And that's just the way that people age. And that's one reason, not the only reason, but one reason. As you get older, you might gain more fat than you did younger. Now, time-restricted eating helps increase human growth hormone release out of your pituitary gland in your own body. So it does this. Research by the Salk Institute demonstrated that the timing of meals is very, very important. And I'm going to go through this with you. Time-restricted eating aligns better with our body's natural rhythms than eating our usual 15, 16 hours a day. See, most people, even if you don't know it, most people are eating about 15 or 16 hours of the day. Not constantly, but within that window, 15 to 16 hours. So you might have 3 meals, 4 meals with a couple snacks, or maybe 1 or 2 meals in there, but 15 to 16 hours that you've been eating, okay? Now, the benefits of time-restricted eating, which is where you would say you stop eating at 10 o'clock at night, and you don't eat again until, say, 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So you have a window of about 8 or 9 hours where you're eating, but you're not eating the rest of the time. Or you could get up at 6 or 7 in the morning and eat around noon, and then stop eating around 6 or 7 at night. Same type of thing, depends on your schedule. You could do that. If you do this, make sure you see a doctor or check with a certified nutritionist before you discuss this. And if you have diabetes, heart disease, or some other problems with your physiology, make sure you don't jump into this. Or the keto diet also. Make sure you do this wisely. The Salk Institute showed that the briefer the daily eating window, the greater the amount of fat loss and the greater amount of muscle gain that would occur. And that would be without even necessarily doing any exercise, okay? Just because of the release of human growth hormone and some other factors that are going on in your body physiology. The researchers believe that a couple mechanisms were responsible for the fat loss, better insulin response, and people a lot of times would consume less calories. Why? Because you're eating in a smaller window, right? But the big benefit was because of the window that you did not eat was large, which allowed your body to rest. We're created to basically only eat for about 12 hours, okay? Again, not constantly eating every hour on the hour for 12 hours, but within a window, you eat your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner, and maybe a snack or two in that 12 hours. Okay, when you do less, you help yourself. It's kind of a fast. If you do more, like most Americans eating 15, 16 hour window, you're hurting yourself. Lower sugar sensitivity and lower diabetes risk occurs when you do this time-restricted eating. Multiple studies have shown that it's also called intermittent fasting. This time-restricted eating seems to improve insulin sensitivity. In some cases, this is really important. A lot of research has borne this out. Some literature, really powerful literature, has shown that in some cases, the diabetes reversed or eradicated the development of the diabetes in the person that was predisposed to it. So this is really interesting. So if you have a family history of diabetes, or you might be struggling with that, this is something to investigate, to pray about, and then talk to your doctor and or a certified nutritionist about. Time-restricted eating also allows the body to reduce surplus glycogen stores. In your muscle, you have glycogen, which is a sugar muscle, if you will. And that glycogen holds multiple parts of water to it. So it helps you retain more weight. But the muscle glycogen also relates to your insulin sensitivity. So this is really, really important. So reducing your window, your eating window, whether it's 9 hours, 8 hours, some people even go radical, like 4 hours, which I would not recommend. Okay, some people that just go radical. I don't think it's necessarily healthy, especially for most people. The body then it starts handling sugar better and better. I don't mean table sugar, because you want to stay away from that. You don't want to eat products that have sugar in them, if at all possible. You don't want to eat a lot of simple carbohydrates either. But there's sugars in natural sugars in a lot of different types of food, vegetables, fruit, and in other products. So it helps your body handle the sugar better. And so you stop eating, say, at 10 p.m., and you start eating again at about 3 p.m. the next day. That's something you could do if you thought that this was a way that your body can handle it, and if you saw a medical doctor beforehand. And so this is something that a lot of people are doing with great success, especially those with diabetes. It tends to lower cholesterol. It tends to raise good cholesterol and lower bad cholesterol. It seems to possibly open up arteries. And if you kind of mix that with a semi-keto diet, or at least a lower carb, moderate fat, moderate protein diet, it tends to work even better. So intermittent fasting is a broad term that focuses on a multiple specific eating patterns of closing the window of eating. Each type of this fasting, if you will, includes fasting periods that are longer than the normal. So the normal is about 8 to 11 hours. You want to extend that to 12 hours, to 14 hours, to 16 hours if you follow this. Time-restricted eating refers to when eating is limited to a certain number of hours each day. Not everybody can do this health-wise. Not everybody can do this mentally-wise. Hello, Nicholas. So good to have you. But it is good for some people if they've seen their doctor, because you don't want to dive into these kind of things. But time-restricted eating, especially those in the West, it can really possibly help save your life and extend your life. There's a lot of good literature on it, on life extension, that it brings in factors that they can measure biochemically within your body physiology that seems to suggest that you might live longer if these particular pointers are improving. And so that's interesting. So poor blood sugar control is a risk factor for diabetes, cancer, and a shorter lifetime. Blood sugar that swings wildly before and after eating indicates that the body is not handling insulin correctly. The sensitivity level it's off. And so this time-restricted eating kind of sets it back and starts correcting it gradually. Again, you don't want to correct it in one day. It's not like one day is going to correct it, but you gradually start correcting that by having this time-restricted eating in place and doing it over a long period of time. And one good thing about time-restricted eating, you can cheat 1 or 2 days. I'd recommend 1 day a week. Now, people that are like roofers or people that work really hard in the outdoors, this might not be something you can do at all, okay? Because then you might have some problem with hypoglycemia, which you can faint, you can have different seizures, different problems. That's one reason you need to talk to a professional about this. The trouble in our bodies is that extra insulin doesn't just impact blood sugar, it also promotes the growth of cells, including cancer cells. Yes. And that's another reason the keto might also be beneficial for that. But this time-restricted eating seems to be easier than following the keto diet. It's different, and it seems to be easier for more people. And over time, the body can't keep up with the demand of more and more insulin. Your pancreas is overworking. Okay, when that happens, your blood sugar levels climb really, really high, leading to many, many health issues. One study found when healthy adult men limited their eating to this 10-hour window, it reduced the number of calories they ate by 20%, and it made their blood sugar and their insulin sensitivity much better. It reduced their bad cholesterol and improved their good cholesterol and lowered their overall cholesterol. Several other studies of both normal weight and overweight people using time-restricted eating of a window of 7 to 12 hours reported fat loss and weight loss of 5% over 2 to 4 weeks. Other studies of normal weight people have reported no weight loss, so you don't necessarily want to do this for a weight loss diet, although some people really, really vouch for that. I would utilize it for a health opportunity to increase your lifespan, to increase the chance that you won't get cancer or heart disease or diabetes. So this style of eating helps you eat fewer calories, but the window where you're not eating really, really benefits your body in multiple ways. One study found that 4 weeks of time-restricted eating during this 8-hour window lowered bad cholesterol by over 10% in both men and women. Several studies in normal weight people have reported reductions in blood sugar up to 30%, with a different study of 20%. So this is really powerful stuff. This is more powerful than a lot of medications. And all it is, again, is just time-restricted eating. One 8-week study examined the time-restricted eating in young men who followed up in weight training. And these men performed much better in their weight training utilizing time-restricted eating. They increased their strength. And one reason for that is certain hormones increase, including, like I said earlier, human growth hormone. Human growth hormone is really, really good at reducing fat stored levels in your body and increasing muscle mass in your body. So, of course, that would seem to help your strength. A similar study in adult men who trained with weights and were doing this time-restricted eating found that they were able to have all their calories in their 8-hour period. They reduced their body fat, get this, by 15%. 15% more than the control group that was doing the same thing, except for the time-restricted eating. So they received great improvements in their strength. So every time you ingest anything but pure water, your body releases enzymes that activate certain metabolic processes in your body, in your liver, and other organs. So if you have a little tea, if you have a little coffee, if you eat something, have a little bread, have some fruit, have some vegetables, whatever it is, good or bad, these metabolic processes are starting to occur. When you fast and only ingest water, because that's what you have to do. You can't have coffee or tea. Nothing in your water. Can't be some type of special water. It has to be pure water. When you fast and you only ingest water, these processes stop. So your body rests. So this is really, really important. As your body functions best and stays its healthiest when it has these rest periods of 12 to 18 hours. So if you eat for 16 hours a day, again, and I'm not saying you're eating nonstop, but your window of eating is 16 hours, your body stops getting healthier and it actually declines. So give your body a rest. Most people, if they eat 8 or 9 hours, is really, really good. Again, see your doctor or a certified nutritionist. Don't just jump in this. There's so much online. I know there's videos that show you how, and there's really smart people, a lot of qualified people telling you how, but I'm telling you, don't do it. It's dangerous. Make sure you see somebody who knows what they're doing before you start. Because what pharmaceuticals are you taking for your health? What's your family history of diabetes? Do you have a history of hypoglycemia? What kind of supplements are you taking? How much coffee you drink? What's your metabolism like? What's your blood pressure like? All these factors come into play, and you can really, really harm yourself with the keto diet and or time-restricted eating if you don't know what you're doing and you're not under some type of care, or at least a program of somebody who knows what they're doing. So be very, very careful. Now, this time-restricted eating lowers your IGF levels and other hormones that increase the chance of cancer, and that's another reason why it's so good. So that's it with the time-restricted eating. If If you have any questions on that, you can message me. Most of the time, I try to get back with a Facebook message within 2 or 3 days. If you email me, usually 1 or 2 days. If you text me, usually the same day. But I do try to get back to everybody. And if you're asking for free materials and free books, our guys will get those to you within usually 2 or 3 weeks. Now, our next subject is way different than nutrition. And remember, I'm a certified nutritionist. That's, why I said all that I did about time-restricted eating. And I keep up on all the literature. I'm really educated in all the literature coming forth in the keto diets, time-restricted eating, supplements, exercise physiology, and so forth. I keep up on that. It's kind of a hobby, a really strong hobby of mine, and I am a certified nutritionist. So you can take all that, but make sure you see somebody in the know if you try the keto diet or you try time-restricted eating.
Hey guys, you can really help us if you donate to our worldwide media outreach. Just go to our Patreon page at Mike Robinson Apologetics on Patreon, or click the donate button on our main page on YouTube and give as the Lord leads. Thank you so much.